Pleased to introduce and welcome Stephen Lightfoot, who's chair of the MHRA, and one of our friends in the media, Ashley Yeo from Informa, who's going to take a little sort of fireside chat approach to see what's going to be happening with the MHRA going forward. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much for the pleasure now to speak to Stephen Lightfoot, chairman of the board of the MHRA. Who succeeded Sir Michael Rawlins in that role. Stephen took up the role last September. That was a few months before the de facto Brexit. And now we've had a few months of experience of the UK being a third country to the EU. So in the devices area, how will the MHRA manage through this time of great change? How might it change? What are the possibilities ahead for UK devices and also for the MHRA on a global scale? I intend to ask Stephen those questions. But first, welcome, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley, and it's a great pleasure to be here.
Excellent.
Before we go into the questions, can I just also thank everybody for their very kind comments about the MHRA? I must say I feel quite humbled by the positive comments that have been made, but we also need to recognise the MHRA is not a thing. It is made up of 1,200 odd people, and it's actually the talented staff of the agency that have done all that fantastic work. So not just Rob and Johan, who you see today, and some of the alumni that have also been on the call today, but my real tribute and thanks goes to all the staff of the agency. They're the people who've done all the real work. So, okay, that's the thanks over.
That's great. Well, before we start, can you say a few words about yourself, including the devices elements that in your career to date?
Yeah. Okay, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Stephen Lightfoot. So I've been... had a 30-year career in the pharmaceutical industry with companies like Roche, Shearing, Daiichi Sankyo and GE Healthcare. And although that experience is largely on medicines, I have actually touched on devices in a number of different places. So, for example, at Shearing, we acquired the Medrad contrast media injector business to support our contrast media sales. We had a range of catheters for infertility treatments that supported our women's health business. And certainly at GE Healthcare, I was responsible for the global radiopharmaceutical and pharmaceutical diagnostic business, about $2 billion of sales around the world. And I worked really closely with our OEM colleagues on the hardware and software, where we're trying to minimise the radiation dose in CT and nuclear medicine by optimising hardware, optimising software, and optimising the imaging agent. So I don't pretend to be a devices expert, but I do have a very strong appreciation of the role that health technology plays. And I guess at the other end of my career, the last 8 years, I've had a portfolio career of non-executive roles. And so I'm deputy chair of my local NHS trust. I'm chair of Sussex Primary Care, as well as being chair of the MHRA. So I've seen healthcare from a number of different perspectives. And I think that's quite important at this time of great change, as you rightly say, Ashley.
So a fantastic experience. Belated congratulations too on the new role. New role, so 8 or 9 months ago. But what a time to assume it on the cusp of the biggest regulatory oversight change for the UK since perhaps the three EU directives came in. I've got sort of 4 batches of groups of questions I want to ask you, Stephen. You came in just as the agency was releasing its document on the UKCA marking, product registration needs and UK RPs, etc. You knew though already that a big change had to happen for UK devices. Can you tell us something about the evolution of the MHRA thinking on the UKCA marking system since then?
Yeah, I think it has needed to evolve, and it's evolved through consultation. I think we really value the relationship that we've got, not just with the trade associations, but also individual companies. And I think one thing that we've learned through the Brexit process, but also COVID as well, is that dialogue is good. Because at the end of the day, we can only fix issues if we really understand what the implications of those are. And so I think in reality, that regular dialogue was really important. Also, I think we pride ourselves on being pragmatic. And so it's been really important to avoid regulatory cliff-edges. And so I think as our intention became clear, we knew there's going to need to be a period of adaptation for the industry. And it was really important that we actually had a standstill period, that we're going through a period of informal consultation, which we've completed. In the next sort of couple of months, we'll be starting a more formal public consultation on the next stage. And that's part of that ongoing dialogue. So I think it is evolving through dialogue. We are going to have to ultimately reach a final conclusion. We do want to do that quickly. because we don't have 2.5 years, or never had 2.5 years to fix this. The reality is we need to make the policy decisions this year. We need to make that really clear in legislation early next year, and then leave a period of adaptation for industry to be able to adapt to the final solution.
Great. So the formal consultation you referred to, can you tell us what's the start point of that process and who will be involved? And I'd like to get a flavour of what goals you want to reach with that consultation.
Yeah, you see, the consultation will be effectively our view of the overall framework. I think it's unlikely we're going to give you the statutory instruments and if you like the legal wording, but I think we need to be able to paint the picture of how these regulations are going to improve patient safety and how they're going to support innovation. And so I think we'll need to, if you like, set out the case for the change. And these are the proposals that we're making, if you like, in strategic terms, and allow people to contribute to that. And it will be a public consultation, so it'll be open to members of the public, to companies, developers, healthcare professionals, anybody who cares to contribute. And that's going to be a vital part of that. I think we'll have to keep then working alongside other key stakeholders, and I would say the key stakeholders are ABHI, among others, in terms of actually getting into some more of the nitty-gritty detail. And of course, our devolved administration. So it has to be a very, very broad and wide consultation to make sure we're taking into account all the different stakeholders that are involved in this. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We really do need to take that opportunity and get it right.
Yeah, and you mentioned the timing there. Time slips away. We've watched as industry has panicked a little bit in a controlled way about the MDR deadlines, and then next year we've got the IBDR as well, with the cliff edge feel about it. But at the same time, we've got the UK CA marking, which will become mandatory in the UK after 2023. The CE marking no longer admissible. How will the MHRA use the time left after that parliamentary process you talked about to stand up? I mean, how confident are you in being able to stand up a usable system in the time limits you have?
Well, I think that's got to be the aim. I think that it's about having the people in place to do the work. We may well need new systems, and actually we've just signed off earlier this week a multi-million-pound investment in further IT systems, and so actually we're putting the components in place now. So the work doesn't, nothing. We're not going to be in a position where we're going to wait until we've got a final set of rules before we start developing. We've got to do some work in parallel here. It's the only practical way. But certainly the aim is to make sure that we give as much time as possible to implement the recommendations. I'd like to think that the way we dealt with the Brexit situation, there was a lot of people very worried about the cliff edge on the 1st of January. I think we demonstrated a regular dialogue with industry. We provided as much guidance as we possibly could, as soon as we possibly could, and we avoided any regulatory cliff edges. I think that's the model that I would see us using when it comes to June, July, 23.
So if it came to it, so this is a bit of the same question, are there mechanisms in place to be flexible, to offer flexibility on that standstill period, add another transition element, perhaps, if the timings are looking tight, to precisely avoid that cliff edge you're talking about?
Well, again, let's not admit defeat and assume that we can't get it done. So let's start off on the positive that we will get this done, and there will be a reasonable length of time for industry to adapt. But I think what will be is pragmatic. I think that's really, really important. And so, I'm not going to make a commitment now that we're going to fail to achieve the deadlines and therefore going to make an extension provision. We're actually going to go to try and hit the deadline. That's the starting point.
Okay. A question now about the other parts of the post-EU UK structure. Post-EU structure in the UK, the Act, Medicines and Medical Devices Act, lays a ground for the UK to set its own post-EU standards and rules. Can you tell us a little bit, give us some idea what you see as the secondary legislation that might encompass, sort of when and how? We heard Lincoln Sang this morning talk about the innovation support mechanisms in the US. Is that the kind of thinking that might characterise MHRA thinking?
Yeah, there's a number of aspects. I think we need to recognise that through the COVID situation, one thing that's been shown is that health is important. And I think that actually progressive, responsive regulation is part of the solution. I think that's what we've seen during COVID, and I think the fact that the Medicines and Medical Devices Act went through Parliament at a time of great pressure, both from a pandemic and from a Brexit perspective, it's still got government priority, shows that there's a real serious intent here to ensure that we end up with a new regulatory system that is fit for purpose, that is reflecting current technologies and gives us that future-proofing that obviously this session is going to do. So there'll be a whole series of secondary legislation, and actually we're already putting plans in place in terms of working out when we're going to get to parliamentary time to lay the various statutory instruments that are involved. This won't be done in one hit; it will be done by a series of legislative changes, because actually we're talking about creating this, as I said, once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a new regulatory system. And this is just the devices. We've also got work to do on other areas as well, thinking of the medicine piece as well. So this is, devices come first, but actually we've still got work to do in the medicine area too.
Okay, so you speak of opportunity for innovation and great ambition, also for pragmatism, as you've mentioned, for the MHRA. A lot of people in the industry have talked up the value of greater rather than lesser convergence with the EU system. What is your view on very close EU alignment? What would be the value of that? What would be the impediments, perhaps?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think there's no doubt the agency has to be outward-facing. But I think that rather than beholden just to a European system, I think we need to look rather more globally than that. And I think if I'm completely honest, having run global businesses, we're in a global industry. And I think actually looking to what the US is doing, for example, is one of the things and directions that we need to look. And I think also the other extreme in Asia, because there's certain aspects of regulatory systems around the world where I think we've got the opportunity to maybe pick and choose. So yes, we absolutely understand the need for international alignment. We understand absolutely that the system is fragmented at the moment. So I think on key standards, yes, we want international alignment. But I think we also maybe want to think about best practices. And I don't think it's just about looking at Europe, because I actually do think that there's a number of aspects of the US which is very valuable. And we talked about MD-SAP earlier in this particular seminar today. And that's just a good example where there might be a case for being more aligned to that than some of the European components.
Okay. Well, can I ask you about the defining perhaps the best practices that the UK might want to avail of from, say, the FDA, Australia, Singapore, to apply in the UK system? Can you give us an idea of the elements that might be better than EU regulation for the UK?
Well, again, I'll be honest with you, I don't want to pick out specific points. All I'm saying is at this stage, while we're going through the development, we're actively looking at best practice from around the world. And I think when we come to the public consultation, some of those components will be visible, I believe. But I think it's also important probably to say that I'm not convinced that one size will fit all here. And I think that's quite an important component because, I think for large global organisations, the lighter touch approach, if you like, once you've got something like MD-SAP in place, makes a lot of sense because, you've got the really robust quality management systems. There's a lot of experience, there's a lot of resource. Then actually that light touch regulation approach could potentially be the right way.
Okay.
When you come at the other extreme, if you've got a startup out of Cambridge or Oxford University that haven't got the resources or the experience, they're going to need a different type of regulatory system. And I think rushing straight into MD-SAP is not going to be the way forward. So I think you're going to need a second domestic route that's probably got more advice associated with it and absolutely more support. And I think we need to think one size is not going to fit all. So therefore, we're going to have different routes for different type of companies, and that gives companies choice. Now, we can't have 25 different alternatives, clearly, but I think we can have more than one. And I think that will be part of the thinking that we do need to incorporate into this.
Okay, so is that to say you'd be considering a system that in fact relies partially on work done in other jurisdictions in order to achieve that light touch in the UK, and to be able to perhaps focus on these selected areas of innovation where you perhaps want the UK to major?
Yeah, well, this really helps actually in terms of the international alignment, doesn't it? Because I think actually there are going to be situations where it will be helpful for industry and developers and to make sure the UK remains competitive to rely on other jurisdictions. And I think we're looking at this in medicines just as much as we are looking at in devices. And so I think there is a case of mutual recognition and reliance in certain defined situations. And there, as you rightly say, there may be other areas where we actually want to say, okay, we're going to have a much more specific UK approach. And I think actually, as Johan was talking about, the whole area of digital and software as a medical device, AI as a medical device, it's completely right for helping to mould, the global regulatory landscape. And I think the MHRA has got a role in terms of actually doing some of that leadership work, because we've got fantastically good people, and actually that real pragmatism, I think is going to be so important. And so we want to maintain our global reputation. We want to remain a world-class regulator. And I think we'll do that by focusing on some of the most difficult areas to regulate. Probably is the area where we can come, really into our own. And maybe there may be other sort of more standardised areas, more mature products that, frankly, maybe we can agree that a reliance model might be more appropriate. And I think the other component around the international landscape is that, it might be a case of trying to move the entire global regulatory network. It's going to take some time. But there might be groups of like-minded regulators where we can actually work together more quickly. And again, just to give you an example on the medicine side again, we've joined something called the Access Consortium, which is the regulators of Australia, Canada, Singapore and Switzerland, and now including the MHRA. And I think we're going to look on the medicine side of aligning some of our regulatory processes, and can we have some level of reliance. And suddenly you're dealing with a population of 150 million people, not a population of 65 million. Now maybe there could be similar options in terms of that reliance model, with like-minded regulators on the device area as well. So that's not a clear decision, but that's just, if you like, the way I'm thinking about this is that international collaboration is the way of helping to move this forward in a way that keeps the UK competitive. And the reason that we're doing that is to ensure that UK patients get new technologies and new products as quickly as they possibly can.
Excellent.
And that's really our raison d'etre.
Great. I want to ask you a couple more questions about international, but I want to ask you a quick one about use of guidelines in the UK as the system evolves. Is there a possibility, instead of using the longer form legislation, that more guidelines will be put in place to make precisely to create this system that's a bit more fleet-footed in the UK, with perhaps international connotations as well?
Yeah, you see, I think the real trick here is actually thinking about risk. It's all about risk proportionality, and I think actually with higher risk, product areas or particular technologies, then we're going to have to, have probably a more stringent approach. Clearly with lower risk, then I think we can take a different approach. So I think the whole area of risk analysis is going to be the critical component of this.
Okay.
That's going to start to determine some of the routes that we might want to take. I think that's going to be a key part of this, without question.
Okay, I wanted to ask you a question about COVID. We talked about the leadership role, as you have too, that the MHRA has shown in global terms of late. The agility that the MHRA showed, as Michael Kipping was talking about earlier today, brought a number of lessons. These lessons and experiences during that period are going to be presumably part of the blueprint for the MHRA as it develops this new role in the world. Yeah,
without question. I think that the way that the agency has responded, and it's the people in the agency. It is people like Steve Lee and Mike Messenger and other people that have been involved that actually made the difference. It's the people that made the difference, and we should never ever forget that. But I think actually some of the key lessons would be about being more proactive. So the target product profiles that have been mentioned today, clearly, one example would be there was a vacuum. Let's fill the vacuum and let's do the right thing. The level of dialogue with industry and developers, was a critical component to that. And I think actually then being prepared to take pragmatic, risk proportionate decisions, to enable derogations where they were appropriate was again completely the right thing to do. So I think there is a level of flexibility. Now, what we're going to have to do, I think it was a comment earlier, we can't manage all the time through derogation. Regulation by derogation is not really the option here. So we're going to have a framework, but a framework that gives us some flexibility to be able to ensure that we are ultimately managing access, innovation, and safety. And I think they're the three components that are going to be really, really important.
Excellent. Your colleague, back onto global themes, if we may, your colleague Rob Higgins was detailing the early experiences, the IMDRF and NDSAP for the MHRA. In your view, what use can the MHRA make of that status that it has at the moment at the IMDRF?
Well, I think it's one of contribution, because I think actually we've got a contribution to make, and what Rob was talking earlier is when he was actually representing Europe almost on his own, now he can represent the UK, and I think a voice at the table is very, very important here. It will take time to get all of the global regulators in exactly the same space, and people will have different approaches and different levels of risk appetite, if I'm honest. But I think we pride ourselves on being pragmatic. We pride ourselves on being progressive and flexible. And I think actually we can be the voice of reason to say, okay, how can we move this forward in a pragmatic way? How can we use the experience and the science base that we've got? And that gives us a unique level of knowledge. And I think actually, the Brits are never afraid to express opinions, and I think that's really important. So we have to be at the table, which is why becoming the officially observers for the time being of the IMDRF and MDSAP, but ultimately I hope we become full members. And then, through that, we want to make a big contribution and actually make a difference.
So you see very clearly the MHRA being an influencer of global policy on a pragmatic and a reasonable voice and a contributor at the table. He said, can the MHRA brand, the UK brand, be used then in that sense to attract the wealth, investment, the inward business back to the UK? How do those two things interrelate?
Yeah, you see, I think that the MHRA is only part of the solution as far as that question is concerned. I don't think we can single-handedly resolve the UK economy. So I think we need to just manage a few expectations, if you don't mind. But I think actually, in terms of the whole area, or the whole government's ambition around the life sciences agenda, inward investment on research, inward investment on development, inward investment on manufacturing, all of those components are vitally important. The MHRA can play a role in each and every one of those, but we can't single-handedly do it. And so it's going to have to be a team effort, and that's why we've got much more partnership working with other parts of the health system. I just heard the question earlier of Johan talking about the multi-agency collaborative that we've got going now, in the AI space, specifically, as agencies working together. As we're doing on clinical trials, we're working very closely with combined ways of working on clinical trials with the HRA to have combined regulatory and ethics approvals. We're working closely with NICE on innovative licensing and access in innovative medicine. I'd like us to do something similar on devices.
Okay.
So I think partnership working across the system is the way to achieve that, and the MHRA wants to be part of that solution.
Okay, and also wants to assert itself as a leader, a global leader in science, in areas, as you just said, pinning down how to regulate AI as it interfaces with health tech and devices. This is an area where the UK could really put its head above the parapet and be noted in the post-Brexit phase.
Yeah, we've got to balance that. We can't take over the world, and we can't be arrogant about this, because actually I think when it comes to scientific knowledge, then I think we do have to listen to others' views. Having said that, I think we've got a role in that discussion, and I want us to actively contribute to that discussion.
Okay, so it's my last batch of questions now, and it's kind of nuts and bolts on innovation and patient safety, and it's a very basic question here. Do we, in the post-Brexit phase, envision the MHRA continuing its successful central role in device regulation in the UK as we know it, by itself, on its own terms, government funded mainly? So that's kind of my own future proofing question thrown in there.
Yeah, you see, I think the whole funding question is actually is multifactorial, if I'm honest. It's not quite as simple as, we've got a gap and the government's going to do it. I think as far as resourcing is concerned, we've got to start by helping ourselves. And I think the agency has grown up over, since 2003 when it was first formed with the MCA and the MDA being combined, and then CPID added on, and then National Institute of Biological Standards and Control has been added on. The agency has grown, organically, as it were. But I think we're going to take a root and branch view of the agency. So I think, frankly, we've got to start by helping ourselves, and we're going to have to reduce some of our costs. That's uncomfortable and it's difficult. But I think there's other areas where we're going to need to invest more. And so I think we're going to have to make sure that we're working efficiently and productively. So yes, we're looking to save costs and make ourselves more efficient, invest in technology. Yes, we're absolutely going to be making a bid for the spending review, and the discussions on that have already started. But I think also we've got to leave on the table the option of fees for industry. Now, it's very clear to me that industry cannot fund all of this. But similarly, I don't think government can fund all of this. And similarly, I don't think we can make enough savings to fund all of this. So I think it's going to be a combination of the three. So I think we've got to help ourselves. We've got to invest in new technology because some of our technology is just frankly too old. We're going to look for extra government funding, and we will have to have the discussion on fees at some point.
And those funding questions will roll over into the next 6, 12, 18 months, I presume, as with the ongoing consultations going on at the moment. But one of the key things that you've accentuated here is the focus on innovation. So can you able to give us some idea of how the agency might change to meet that particular remit in regulating for data, software, 3D printing, digital genomics, the whole panoply of advanced technology, medical products, CDX, etc., coming through the line for the UK?
Yeah, you see, strategically, it's a really tough challenge actually, because we're going to need to make sure we bring in and have the expertise. It starts on expertise. I think some of that's one of the earlier presenters was talking about. We're going to have to learn as we go along, and I think that's exactly right. I don't think anyone's going to have exactly all of the answers. But we do need to make sure we've got the right skills in place, and that's the prerequisite. I think certainly we're going to have to make sure that we're working with the developers, because I think actually some of this is being developed as we progress, and it's being prepared to be flexible as long as ultimately we take that risk proportionality into account. Right. So everything we do has to come back to what is the risk here, because our role has got to be to keep patients safe, and we can't underestimate that. But I think that actually, particularly on the clinical trial arena, then I think what you want at early stages is quick decisions. So I think if everything we can do to accelerate clinical trial approvals for those particular products that require clinical trials, then that's vitally important. So that's part of our role. I think it's also a case of then being open to particularly the converging technologies. I think that's where I think the old boundaries, if you like, of medicine or effectively of drugs, devices, diagnostics, digital and data. They're 5 product groups at the moment, but they're really not. They're going to become one. And I think actually how we navigate our way through that is going to be really quite critical. And so I think from an agency point of view, I think rather than just looking at specific products, we need to be thinking of the life cycle of all products, because some of these boundaries are going to blur. So that's why I do see us having a team responsible for innovation, a team responsible for access, a team responsible for safety, and actually sharing the experiences across these multiple technologies that's going to help to make us more competitive.
Excellent. On that safety theme, you'll be expected to feed into some of the thinking that went into the Cumberledge report, and the recommendations that came out of that, the review in terms of adverse event reporting, maybe the notion that the MHRA has no involvement in pre-market phase of medical device development, and registries of devices. So there's a lot on the patient safety side to factor into, which must become a huge theme of the agency as it goes forward.
It is, and again, we've signed up a major investment in a new system called Safety Connect. We're very much, working One of my non-executive directors is actually on the advisory panel for NHS Digital, for example, on the registry development. So, we're keeping very close here in terms of actually development of registries, because I think that's part of it. How we bring other data sources in. We're going to need to be thinking of not just sort of a few tens of thousands of reports, but how we're going to cope with hundreds of thousands of reports from multiple sources. As we're using on COVID-19 vaccines at the moment, we've got an artificial intelligence tool that's involved in helping us to manage the 500,000 adverse reports that we've had from patients from the vaccine program over the last 4 months. So we're already starting to use that technology, and I think we can build on that. So I think there's definitely a technological component to this. There's clearly an expertise component to that. But it's also then, as you rightly say, it's making sure we're actually involved at the right stages in the process. Yeah. And I think ultimately we haven't really talked about patient involvement. And I see the other key component to all of this is that there needs to be patient involvement at every stage of the development cycle, from basic product specification and definition, certainly the clinical trial level, certainly during the authorization process, and absolutely during the commercial use and the safety monitoring. Excellent. So we need to involve patients at each step of that particular journey.
That's great. Well, we're coming close to time now, Stephen, but I've just got one quick comment that I'd like you to accentuate, if you would, is that you referred to it throughout the partnership relationship with industry, continuing the transparency and the collegial approach, as it were, that seems to have served the agency very well in recent years, to the envy of some counterpart jurisdictions. Even that's a policy that you're intending to maintain.
Absolutely. I think we've shown through both Brexit and COVID that dialogue, open, constructive, regular dialogue, is part of the solution. That doesn't mean to say we're always going to say yes. We absolutely have to reserve the right to say no. But I think it starts from a process of making decisions based on an understanding of the practical implications. Mm. So, that's where the rubber really hits the road as far as I'm concerned. But I think if we can do that, then I think we genuinely can help to accelerate innovation. I think we can enable access, and we can strengthen patient safety. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
So optimistic message. Thank you very much, Stephen, for all the messages, for being so open about it. Best wishes in the challenges ahead. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. It's been very interesting. I think we now hand back to Phil and Andrew, I think.
Well, just thank you very much, everybody. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Ashley. Great. Shame we couldn't have let that one run, quite honestly, but it's great to hear that we got a regulator here who wants to be pragmatic, wants to engage with industry, take an internationally leading role, and be very flexible and risk-based. It's great, so thank you very much.